Welcome, intrepid adventurers, to Paranormal M, your portal to the paranormal. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications to join us on our quest for the truth behind the inexplicable. Prepare to be intrigued, enthralled, and amazed. The Ghost Likes Downtown Abbey. I have a little cat who I brought with me, and my first real experiences in this house includes her. When we first moved, she was instantly attracted to a specific windowsill at the front of the house, where she, pretty much now spends most of her time. She would always act like something was playing with her, which isn't unusual for cats, or maybe even petting her. I'd always hear her purring and see her rubbing herself all over the window randomly throughout the day. Then I would start to wake up in the night and hear her playing with something in the living room right next to the window. I often found little trinkets or pieces of trash that I've never seen before scattered in the living room after being asleep all night. This is, again, not that unusual for a cat. They tend to find really odd things to play with, so I brushed it off. Then one night I had a friend stay over. She swore up and down that my cat had been playing with a ribbon that was like hovering in midair in front of her. Figured it had gotten stuck on something, that the cat had just started playing with it since it, never did find the ribbon. Until the next few experiences happened. I recently started binging TV shows. And one of those shows was Downton Abbey. If you don't know what it is, I don't. It's a period piece drama set in the 1910s. Every time I would turn on the show, I would hear quick little steps running into the living room in the front window. Thought it was my cat, didn't think anything about it, not seeing her since she's kind of black and blends in with the dark flooring. When I would turn off the TV, I would sometimes hear a click, and the TV would go right back to Downton. It was always playing season 1, episode 3. I could never find a technical reason for both the TV, the Xbox, and Netflix all being turned on at the same time. Especially in the same episode. I do have a Chromecast as well, but generally you have to go to the app and click a few buttons to cast. Also, the source would need to be changed on the TV. This happens nearly every time I turn off the show. It's a bit annoying now, but I just leave the show on while I do other things. The only other thing that's happened is sometimes I hear soft banging or tapping from the closet beside the front window and my cat isn't there. Almost like it's calling my cat over, a ghost, if you will. My cat's loving it here, and we're super happy. This is such a great house, and it seems like whatever is here enjoys having us. It doesn't seem like some of these experiences are exactly paranormal, but when all of them are happening at the same time, it makes me pause. Not too sure what to think yet, but it seems harmless enough, right? Odd flickering. This event happened around November of 2022, and it was about 8 p.m. I was by myself at the entrance area of the school. My dad and I go to pretty much evening and night school. I'm studying computer science, and my dad studies mechanical engineering. At that time, I had 3 first periods free because my teacher was sick. I was hanging out at my dad's class, and I saw that the break was coming up after it, and I had class, and because of the distance, I decided to cross the campus. So I wouldn't be late to class. The break was 10 minutes, and it took 8 minutes to cross the campus at a normal pace. But due to my osteoarthritis, sometimes my legs are heavy and my walk is slow. That day was the day that my legs were heavy, and my osteoarthritis was flaring up, and my pace was very slow. So at 8 p.m. I was waiting for the bell to ring, signaling the first break. I was sipping my hot chocolate from my thermos after having gone to school cafeteria to get some ice cubes to put in because it was too hot. I was about to start scrolling through my phone since I was by myself and I felt very on edge. I was coming down from a week-long anxiety attack. I'm thinking it was because, probably because of that I felt on edge. To my left, there's this entrance door that leads to the second school on campus, my old high school. And where I was about a few minutes ago, since my dad's class located in the basement of that building, beside that building, there's a lamp post that I turned to see it. A second after my eyes set on it, I noticed it was flickering. Thought nothing of it, thinking it must be bugs flying around it or because of what was happening with the energy crisis in our town, lowering the voltages. That's causing that flickering as they did during the COVID-19 lockdowns. Hence why I say I think it's paranormal, but what makes me post this here is how the flickering and the black that appeared in between it started becoming bigger and bigger every time. 3 times flickered and the third time was a black spot and it was very big. Then there was an oomph sound from elsewhere, kind of everywhere and nowhere, all at the same time. That was before almost the entire campus was dived into darkness. Everything was dark except for the classes. You could see the lights from the space under the door, and the darkness lasted for maybe 2 or 3 minutes. I jumped up and walked as fast as my legs would allow me to the cafeteria to ask the lady behind the counter and the cleaner that was there, seeing if they were okay. To get to them from where I was, it would take me about a minute tops. But when I entered the cafeteria, the lights came back on, and when I asked, they said that there was no power outage. Confused, I walked back to the bench I was sitting at, and everything was normal. Bell went off, and a break ensued. But in the minutes of darkness, it was completely silent, and I felt dread and on edge, even a bit of fear. I'm used to power outages from living on the island growing up, but many times ran out of power throughout the winter, so I was always carrying a flashlight with me. I'll make sure my phones always have flashlights. Amsterdam and Athens. I'm going to night and evening school in a small town in central Macedonia. One of my classmates, Zoe, has 2 kids, a son and a daughter. The son lives in Shanghai and the daughter lives in Amsterdam. This Christmas, Zoe orchestrated a surprise visit with her son to Amsterdam to go see her daughter. After the surprise, they decided to do tourist stuff. And on an Anne Frank tour, sorry if that's not the right way to say it, I'm not trying to be disrespectful. That's when Zoe noticed a familiar person. Me, or at least somebody who looked like me. I'm talking identical looking. She wore the same outfit I would wear on the first day back to class after holidays. My white fleece shirt, my fleece gray leggings, my black trainers, my black cardigan, and my gray puffy jacket, along with my purple beanie. I also had my pink Oxford-themed scarf and emerald green gloves. The identical me wore the exact outfit as described and had the same hair color as me. Dark brown, and even she had the same body type and walk. Getting deja vu reading this. Anybody else remember this story? Zoe spent most of the tour being perplexed and hurt that I didn't come and say hi, so by the end of the tour she walked up to the identical me and got her attention. But the identical me turned, and Zoe, instead of meeting my glasses wearing hazel green-brown eyes, Zoe was looking into emerald green eyes and no glasses. Confused, Zoe asked her name, and she said that her name was Helena Nasto, instead of my name, which is from Aigio in Peloponnese. To make things weirder, the last name Nasto is a family name for my dad's side of the family. Aigio is where my maternal grandmother and her family are from, and Helena is a family name and a name that my parents consider my name. Zoe then shared this event on the first day of class after we exchanged gifts. I shared wrapped desserts for my name day, which is on New Year's. I found it very odd because it reminded me of a different story my mom told me that Uncle Nikos, a family friend we refer to as Uncle, experienced in early December. The event goes as such. Uncle Nikos lives in Athens. One day he was on a public bus when he saw me on the bus. He found it hilarious because he was on the phone with my mom. He hangs up because he was about to get down and decided to pass by and surprise me. She wore the same gray puffy jacket and she had red hair like I had the last time Uncle Nikos saw me. He walked up to her and tapped her on the shoulder, called her by my name, when the other looked him up and down confused. Uncle Nikos saw emerald green eyes. And Uncle Nikos realized he made a mistake. Called my mom asking where I was, and Mom eyed me across the table as I was eating breakfast and said I was here with her. He got so confused and told us the story. My money's on a doppelganger, while my dad thinks it's a parallel universe version of me, while my sister thinks it's a cousin of ours, but spent the holidays looking for her social media but couldn't find her. Dad asked around the family, but there's a Helen and a Stowe, but they don't look alike at all, and she's blonde with blue eyes. It's the first 2 times that people said they saw me somewhere I haven't been, or even someone looking identical to me. It's not my mom. How to handle what's happening in my house. In March, we moved into our house, which was built in 1887. Over the last few months, some seemingly harmless things have been happening with more frequency. Small things falling in rooms no one's in, lights flickering, small objects moving and appearing and disappearing. Strange sounds in the house, including on the stairwell. They aren't explainable. Whenever I hear a sound like that, I stop what I'm doing and listen intently to try to understand what's causing it. Sometimes, as soon as I go back to what I was doing, there's immediately another sound. I'm starting to worry that somehow by paying attention to what's happening, I'm encouraging it or playing a role in the increasing frequency. One other thing happened that I really hope is not related, but feels worth mentioning. For context, I'm an avid lucid dreamer, and I've never experienced sleep paralysis. I woke up in the middle of the night a few months ago. This was right before the weird stuff started slowly ramping up. I was feeling like someone was staring at me. The same way my cat can wake me up by staring at me, and I open my eyes, and even in the near complete darkness, I can see a face right in front of my face staring at me with a huge smile. My head was on the side of the bed, so he was like squatting with his hands on his knees next to the bed staring right at me, like he was watching me sleep. I immediately rolled over, tried to wake up my husband, trying to kick blankets and pillows between me and the man, but my husband won't wake up for anything when he's fast asleep, so it was pointless. I ended up huddling against his back under the covers and eventually going back to sleep myself. I'd like to write off that last part as a dream or something, but I feel in my gut that it wasn't. The energy I experienced from the man was not a negative nor positive one. My sense was that he didn't think I could see him, was not trying to scare me. I've also had a friend who visited the house since that incident, and she says she feels an energy, in quotes, in the house. It doesn't feel malicious. This was without me bringing up anything that's happened. She said it pretty much unprompted, asking me, "Have you experienced a presence here?" Woman with no face in Pensacola, Florida. My boyfriend and I are camping at Fort Pickens Campground in Pensacola. Last night was a full moon, and around 9:30 or 10 at night we went for a walk down at the beach with our husky to look at the ocean and check out the moonlight. We sat there for maybe an hour and just talked about life in general, but towards the end of the conversation, we started talking about how the ocean can play tricks on you, and how strange the energy can be sometimes. We're swapping stories about how we've seen people who we thought might not really be people before. I understand that when you talk about things like this, it puts you in a very specific type of headspace. All night I tried to justify what happened to us as a trick of our minds and maybe us hyping ourselves up. But we both saw the same thing at the same time, and there's absolutely no way it wasn't real. Started walking back to camp, and it was maybe a quarter mile from the beach down a little boardwalk thing to the main road. Once you get to the main road, you see the entrance to the campsite. There's a small parking lot there, stop sign, a picnic table, and a building that looks abandoned and out of business. This building is 1 story tall, doesn't have any signs out front, and I don't believe the doors and windows are shuttered, but they're definitely not accessible. Like, I wouldn't even be able to press my face against a window and try to peek in. That's kind of boarded up. So I was sitting on this picnic table while Shane was standing and telling me a creepy story about something he saw in the ocean when he was 11 years old. We were there for maybe 10 minutes, and we were talking about a story. I was trying to debunk it and figure out with him, rather, with all of a sudden a girl just comes up walking out of the campsite area towards us. stops at that building. We were both thinking nothing of it because we had already seen 2 people walking that night, and we knew people were active because it was a full moon and wanted to make the most of the campsite. But this girl walks up to the abandoned building and just looks like she's peering into the window or trying to open the door on the right side of the building. I almost even remember her standing on her tippy toes. She obviously doesn't get in, and then she decides to walk all the way across the length of the building right in front of us into the left side. This is when I start to get uncomfortable because she doesn't look at us or address us even though we're loudly standing there talking. And that's all the while she's just walking. All I could see was her side or back profile, like a long brown ponytail. I know this doesn't make sense, but it's how can somebody walk from right to left in front of you and you don't see the side of their face? All I saw was her hair. It's not like she had her head turned, if that makes sense. So she rounds the corner in the left side of the building and doesn't come out. At this point, I'm actually invested and I'm grilling the location she went to the whole time. I don't take my eyes off of it. I don't really know how to explain this, but it didn't seem like she kind of walked back behind the building. It seemed like she was right there and was waiting for us to do or say something. There's a little ledge on the side of the building that looks maybe 3 or 4 inches wide, kind of like a gutter hanging off. I swear on my life, it's like she went behind this little 4-inch ledge and flipped herself sideways and was frozen and watching us. Shane has this spotlight for hunting that he uses as a flashlight, and he shined it in the little ledge area of the building that she went behind. We kept seeing something low to the ground on the side of the ledge, and it made us think that she was just standing there doing something. So, Shane shines his light in that direction and screamed, "Yo, what's up, you good?" After this, he kept his spotlight pinned where we thought that she would pop out, and after a delayed 4 or 5 seconds, we literally saw her spring out of the shadow and leer forward, facing right. She had her back hunched over, so she wasn't standing as tall as she normally would. Can't explain how scary it was to be sitting there watching this whole thing take place, and once we shine our flashlight, having on this person's face pop out from the side of the building, it legit would have been less scary if she never even came out and we circled the whole building and no one was there. Her movement was incredibly unnatural. It was as if no human being would respond with their body language that way after having a flashlight shining on them. It's like she couldn't figure out what to do and she showed herself only because we made her. It was almost as if she was scared of getting caught of doing something wrong, not scared of us. The way she popped out, her face was turned towards us. She had her arms kind of sprawled out, almost like praying mantis arms or something. I know this sounds ridiculous, but there's literally no other way to explain this. But the best part about this part of the situation that neither of us figured out until we talked about it later was that neither of us saw a face on this woman. It was just smooth skin or clay-colored, rounded, and with no eyes or facial expressions. I want to say that I personally almost saw divots or pits where the eyes should be, but there was nothing substantial there. We were still trying to figure out this encounter, so we weren't super quick to get scared at this point. We thought it was our minds playing tricks on us. So this is where the story starts to differentiate a little bit, so bear with me. After she pulls her body back behind the ledge, Shane turns his flashlight off. That's when I asked him to, because I felt like it was rude. At this point, she's back behind the ledge and the light's off, and I see her extended body about 3 feet off the ground as if she's crouching and reaching out at the same time. Like she was going to take an over-exaggerated step and almost tiptoe off like a cartoon character or something. She leaned forward 1 step to the right and then pulls herself back behind the ledge and stands up straight and starts walking back to the right side of the building in front of us. Shane has his flashlight on her the whole time. Now she says, "Oh, I just wanted to change without having to go all the way back." But it's like, all the way back where? She literally just came from the campground. She could have changed there if she was heading to the beach. Was she going to start to swim at 10:30 at night? Just didn't make sense. why she needed to change in that specific spot even. The strange part is that I specifically heard her talk about changing, and Shane heard her say something about just having to pee. I'm not sure if one or both of us just misheard her, or if Shane just assumed that's what she was doing, because that's what I thought at first too. But as she walked from the left side of the building across the right and back down the trail toward the campground, she kind of scurried away quickly as if she was embarrassed. The crazy thing is that I didn't see her face the entire time that she did this. It was like she walked across the first time, all I saw was her long brown ponytail. After she slowly walked down the road back toward the campsite, Shane and I were talking about how fucked off. Okay. Shane and I were talking about how fucked off that whole interaction was, and that we needed to get back to our own site. He told me that this person had a short blonde bob or a Karen-style haircut. He couldn't believe me when I said that she had a long brown ponytail because he hadn't seen that color anywhere on this person. There's absolutely no way that one of us could have mistaken these two specific haircuts and colors for the other. As we walked back to our campsite, we walked past a handful of good, dark trees that I, as a female, would definitely have peed or changed behind. It's like this building was so far out of the way, and I would never think to go to a distant right side of it by myself late at night in order to change my clothes. It's like it just didn't make sense, the choices that she made. And trust me, we spent enough time in the city where we live in New York, New Orleans, and Venice, and Denver, etc. We saw somebody doing stuff like this, we would chalk it up to the person being high or just kind of laugh it off. But this is random, quiet in a family campground where everybody's super happy and peaceful. Sure, we tried to justify, maybe, it's just some drunk chick being sloppy, not knowing what's going on, but even that doesn't hold any weight in comparison to her body movements and that smooth face that we saw staring back at us. Nothing about this person's body movements were natural. Not when she came slinking up, not when she didn't notice us sitting there, not when she looked in the window, not when she walked across the building, and now when she dipped behind the ledge, not when she peered out, not when she crouched down, not when she replied to us, and definitely not when she scurried off. This is one of those situations that had tears in my eyes and had me shook, but I was incredulous at the same time because I couldn't believe it really happened to me. It's like I almost couldn't even be scared because it's already happened. And I just saw what I did. We talk about NPCs sometimes and joke about people making us uncomfortable and maybe not being real, and we really believe that sometimes we cross paths with angels. But this was something else entirely. This was something that seems like a lower form or less intelligent than us that was pretending to be a human. I feel like I should add this as a side note, but I'm Native American and I'm super familiar with stories of witches or bad medicine or shapeshifters. In a lot of our stories, these are humans who are incredibly intelligent and powerful, and have this human urge based on jealousy or anger or evil to target individuals and appears in another living form. I'm telling you right now that nothing about this encounter felt like that. This didn't seem like something smarter than us. This didn't seem like something with an emotional intention. It didn't seem quick or cunning or like it wanted something from us. This was the exact opposite end of the spectrum. It seemed like it was mimicking or mocking human movements. No idea what its intentions were or why it was here of all places. Why it presented itself to us that night, but I guess I just have to move forward with the knowledge that it happened. Double asterisks. Also, we aren't too sure how much this plays into either, but we're coming from New Orleans and we're having really strange experiences there. Not so much with people per se, but I don't really feel like it's fitting for the subreddit, but with energy, definitely. Felt as if sometimes the streets would shift or change. Energy portals would develop, certain places would make us uncomfortable or cause our emotions to be super intense. The graveyard and church we ended up sleeping next to gave us constant nightmares, made us feel like we couldn't fall asleep, as if something was looking into our windows all night. I heard a voice in the same spot one night that foreshadowed our cat getting killed. We heard weird animalistic roars coupled with metallic banging and clanging while we were falling asleep. The wind was blowing our curtains violently around on the right side of our bus. That was while the left side curtains were completely untouched, while our blind husky, who usually sleeps all through the night, was sitting up with ears perked up staring out the window. It was all just getting too much to bear. We felt like the city was trying to take something from us. Got out of there to go on vacation to this campsite on the beach and aren't sure if we really brought something along with us or not. We're trying to piece it all together as best as we can. The Demon Visitor. Background. I live in an 1880s farmhouse. I've had issues with the home ever since I moved in. Bad dreams before the move-in date, even. Even my sister had dreams about the living room of the home being filled with red light and angels trying to keep her away from it after nightfall. Sometimes the property can be quite beautiful. Other times it shines a darker kind of light. For now, I'll ignore the majority of the experiences and speak about the woman I came here to talk about. I just can't get her out of my head. I see her cruel eyes every time I close mine. I only pray that it'll stop, and soon, too. It started with a dream. I guess it was more of a nightmare. I was standing in the kitchen next to my mother and a woman asking about the house. The woman seemed to know the energy was off. She seemed to be a sort of psychic medium. She started asking me questions about the home. Do you hear banging at night? Does it come in threes? Do you often feel watched? Do you sleep well at night? Do you wake up with scratches and bruises and have no explanation for how you receive them? The whole shebang. It was while she was asking me her questions when I started to feel the heaviness of the air. I felt as though I were being watched, so I turned to look into the library off the kitchen. The light for the library was off, but I could still see through the dark due to the dim glow of a hanging ceiling light in the kitchen, though I honestly wished I hadn't been able to. When I looked into the library, I saw a figure hanging from the ceiling upside down. She was standing with her arms out as though she was formulating an upside-down cross with her body, like she was mocking Jesus Christ. She dropped down from the ceiling and dragged her body across the floor before standing up in the doorway and entrance from the library to the kitchen. She walked over to me and grabbed my shoulders, and without moving her mouth, she told me that she was never going to leave. And also that I couldn't send her away. She was always going to torture me. I began screaming at her to leave in Jesus' name, and she only smiled. Pushed her out of the house, but still smiled at me from the other side of the door. I woke up breathing heavily. The entire day I could feel this woman's presence around me. I was sure she was real. This was the first time I had seen her. I decided my room was the problem, and since I didn't want to see her again, I changed where I'd been sleeping. Went to go sleep in the room off the garage on the couch. Everything was fine for a few nights. Until it wasn't. I had been dreaming of an elderly man who was standing at the entrance of the doorway to the room I was sleeping in. He simply told me to run and that she was coming. The look of fear in his face was one I'd never seen on anyone before. He was horrified. I asked him what he meant because the woman wasn't on my mind, but all he did was point. I looked over to see the same woman from a few nights before running toward me, her black frizzy hair and solid black irises staring into my soul. As soon as she reached me, I felt a heavy weight on my chest. I began to wake up and be in the real world, but I was unable to move my body. Tried to open my eyes, but I could only manage to open them for a second or two at a time. And every time I did, I saw the woman crawling around the couch. My eyes were closed for most of it, but I felt her get on top of me, and my eyes opened one last time to see her on top of my body, ready to bite me before I passed out. I don't know if I was afraid or simply tired, maybe both. When I woke up again soon after, I checked my phone to see it was around 5:47 a.m. It wasn't that early, and there was some light from the outside windows. I sat up in bed trying to process what had just taken place, and I decided to brush it off. But as hard as I tried, I couldn't shake her face from my mind. So I drew a picture of her. I'm not an artist by any means, but I needed to get it down on paper. This was the second time I saw her. I decided to stay in the room off the garage because it was clear that it wasn't the location. I didn't see her again for a few nights until I did. I was dreaming again. I sat in bed because I felt her near me. It was a sickening feeling that I couldn't mistake for anything else in the world. I heard scratching from a nearby door. The entrance to the closet in the corner of the room where my mother kept large racks full of tablecloths and bags of unopened chips. I turned my attention toward the noise. The door to that room is a difficult door to open. I often have to throw my entire body weight into the door to open it, but at this moment it opened on its own. As the door slowly opened to nothing more than a crack, I could see half of the woman's face. Her blank, expressionless face stared at me from behind the door. I didn't move, nor did I really make a sound. I was kept in place by my fear. She slowly exited the room and walked toward me, jumped off the couch and backed away screaming at her. I told her she wasn't welcome and that she was to leave my house immediately. She never blinked. She only continued slowly moving closer to me as if I hadn't been yelling at her at all. She only stopped to bend over and look me straight in the eyes, her face inches from mine. Then I woke up, shot straight up, looked toward the door to the closet, and it was still closed. This was the third and final time I saw her. 3, yet another mockery of God and Holy Trinity. I've never seen her again since that day, but sometimes I still feel her around me. Haunted asylum attacked by spirits. This happened a couple of days ago. My family and I went to an old asylum while on vacation. They had renovated it up a bit, put a couple of stores and a restaurant inside, so my father thought it would be a nice place to visit. When we drove into the driveway, I was overcome with dizziness. Couldn't see straight, and I couldn't finish typing the message I had been typing before we pulled in. As I got out of the car, the dizziness subsided for the most part, and we all went inside. It still looked like an asylum. The doors were like metal cage doors, the floor was old and cracked. The walls were old yellowed bricks, and there were entrances that were covered over with more bricks, so no one could enter. As we began walking down the halls, I noticed something was off. The overall feeling in the place was just terrible. Started getting a headache, but it was only minor. I know spirits can give people headaches and stomach aches, so I wasn't surprised. And as I said, mine was minor, but I couldn't help but notice that my sister was getting worse and worse. As we continued walking down the hall, we stopped to look at one of the stores. There was an old-looking metal door that resembled something that would be in an animal cage. It was just a pitch-black empty room on the other side. I'd mentioned to my mother the feeling I had about the place, and so as a joke she held me close to the cage and said, "Look in there. Do you see a ghost yet?" As they were all laughing, I stood there in shock, for there was someone on the other side of that gate looking at me. Ripped away from her grasp, kept walking down the hall away from the cage-like door. My sister was giving me a look, so I knew she wanted to tell me something. We went off to the side and she told me that she had a terrible pounding headache. We kept walking and she told me about it, but I could see she was getting worse and like she didn't know where she was going anymore. Took her outside the building for a minute to help her head and told her to pray and imagine a white light around herself. I'm getting deja vu again as a narrator. I feel like I've read a slightly different version of this. Anyway. She did this and started to walk away from the building. Her headache was getting better. My father scheduled for us to eat inside the building and her table was ready, so we were forced to go back inside. She told me her headache was even worse than before and that she was about to pass out and that the praying in white light now made it worse. We were texting each other and she was telling me that it felt so strong, like a pressure on the back of her head. Soon enough, I could see that she couldn't take it anymore, so I just kind of took her outside again. My parents were furious, but only because they didn't understand. Once I took her outside, she started to cry and shake, so I took her away from the building and went on a walk. Went across the street. Talked to her about how the Lord was with her. Her headache stopped, and so did the pressure. Her parents texted us telling the food was there, so again we were forced to enter the building. Held her hands and prayed with her before we entered again, and we ate as fast as possible and got out even before her parents did. We drove off, but she still felt uneasy, and so did I. We got out of the car at our next destination, but it was almost like we were still in the asylum. My sister started crying and shaking again, and she asked if if it could make her kill herself. I asked her why, and she told me that it was giving her suicidal thoughts and that it was making her kind of depressed and draining her energy. I took her and my mom and dad, and we all prayed together over her. As I placed my hand on her head while praying, it was weird. I could feel it there still. It had followed us here. It thought that she would be an easy target. Maybe she would have been if I wasn't there. Maybe that's what scares me the most. I'm not sure if it's gone or not, but when we arrived back at the hotel, I saw and heard someone following me in the hall, so I thought it was my sister, but when I turned around, no one was there. But that could have just been a different spirit. I'm pretty used to him now. Last night, my sister and I didn't sleep. We were kept awake all night. Maybe we were scared, or maybe we were kept up by something else. Something dark, something inhuman. I guess we'll know soon enough, won't we? Experiences as a chaplain. I'm a professional chaplain for the Order of St. John of Rhodes, Malta, and Jerusalem. I specialize in blessings, cleansings, and spiritual conflict. If you're ever looking for advice, feel free to PM me. I'd be more than happy to help if I can, but otherwise thought I'd like to add to the experiences of this sub. I've had some awesome paranormal experiences, and I was around this sub a little while ago, becoming active again, so I thought I'd share a recent experience which freaked out my partner. After I started to get more involved in spiritual guidance, conflict, and intervention, we started noticing more stuff happening around the house. One thing that came to visit was a large, dark figure. We're about 8 feet tall, and I'm 6'4", so tall in my own regard, but this thing was huge. It was coming from an underground storage next to our room. We were staying in the basement. After getting involved in a particularly nasty case, things started with knocking on the door from the underground storage area. Once a day at random times, we would hear a simple knock, knock, knock. The area was a brick-walled room with dirt floor, but there was no external access by either wind or people. We largely ignored it. When the knock happened, if I was there, I would rebuke whatever was knocking by letting it know it wasn't welcome. My partner, however, sort of opened the door after knocking but didn't tell me. She's not as spiritual as I am, and she was curious to figure out what the knocking was. The next day, we were relaxing in bed when a guitar standing next to the door strummed twice, incredibly loudly. Again, I rebuked, but again, I didn't know she'd answered the door. That night, I was struggling to fall asleep. I was tossing and turning and was frustrated. So I opened my eyes to go back on my phone. When I did, roughly 20 feet away, I saw a huge black shadow figure standing in the corner looking at us. It was well built, with broad shoulders and strong-looking body. I was frozen with shock at first, then flashed my phone's screen in this direction. It didn't disappear immediately, but slowly dissipated from the bottom upwards. I prayed an incantation, went back to sleep. The next night was the same. I struggled to sleep. I had a feeling why. When I was almost asleep, I opened my eyes, and again there was a figure. Except this time it was standing next to the door to the underground area. I grabbed my blessing, Taiaha, it's a Maori weapon, stood, then started to perform a fairly serious prayer. This half awoke my partner, and this matter soon. As I prayed into the darkness, the same thing happened. The figure slowly disappeared. The next day, my partner asked what I was doing, and I told her. I then asked her if she'd seen anything, and she said that she'd been hearing the knocking and tried to find the source. I asked her if she'd opened the door after knocking, and she said yeah. So I finally did what I should have. I was probably too scared at the time in case I picked a fight and I couldn't win. I was new to all this. Blessed both our room and the storage room. I used frankincense and myrrh, incense, holy water, and prayers in English, Latin, and my native Maori language. I placed an iron cross above the door on the inside of the house and placed bigger wooden crosses above all entry points to my room, including that one. The creepy room and other stuff. Kia ora. I did the dealing with the supernatural post a couple of weeks ago. Offered to help people deal with stuff. I've been helping some people by giving advice, and I've been completely blown away by the increase of supernatural stuff going on around me. That being said, there is already clues to one of those things, but I was too complacent to find them. The creepy room. Staying at my partner's, living with her family while we save for a house, a relatively new house. But there's one room that's given her the heebie-jeebies. She's never told me until she scolded me for making shit worse with that paranormal crap on Reddit. I do love her and she loves my work, but she opened up to me that when she was younger she lived in what she believes to be a haunted house, and it terrified her. The room is a concrete cellar that's underneath a section of the house. The house is built into a hill, and her bedroom is only access doors to this concrete cellar. And here's what happened so far. I was on my computer and I heard 3 gentle knocks on the cellar door. Thought I was being paranoid, but to be sure I muted my music, did a quick look around the room to make sure no other doors or windows were open, then went back to work. After about 5 minutes I heard 3 distinctive loud knocks. I rebuked it. I prayed. What you would expect, I'm a chaplain. Tried to cleanse it, but I honestly think I need to cleanse the room or do the same work on it because at the moment I'm on the defensive. Then a few days later, is slowly walking up to bed, and for reference, my guitar sits next to the door to the cellar. My partner was reading next to me, and we both heard, I jolted away by it, 3 loud twangs on the guitar strings. Different strings, too. Really freaked her out, and she got really mad at me again for helping people on this forum. I didn't rebuke this because I was half asleep and really should have. The final thing in this room, which I only found out, that's her younger brother, 15, refuses to go into it. If there are things that need to be stored in there, puts them outside of the door and leaves it for someone else. I asked my partner why he does this, and she said it's funny. He said he's not surprised that you put a cross above the doorway. Whenever he goes into that room without fail, he has nightmares all night and he won't go in there at all. I've since bolstered up my protection somewhat, and things have quieted down. I have a Bible open to Psalm 91, and every night I burn frankincense and myrrh outside the door. There's a wooden cross above the door, a rosary on the Bible handle, and a silver cross held in the Bible. I know it seems overkill, but I take this seriously because other stuff. One morning I woke up and the central components of my prayer station were thrown across the room. I have a picture on my profile, but basically the parts in the middle that can't really fall off were thrown onto the floor, my incense burners. The rest of the station is 3 blessed Maori weapons, a Bible older than our country, a wooden cross, a silver and greenstone cross necklace, and a whalebone tiki, a guardian in our culture. This was good enough reason to make me take things seriously. My partner was also freaked out one evening when I was sitting up in bed, dead asleep, holding the blessed patu and chanting in Maori. I bless in Maori because of my belief that spirits may speak the indigenous tongue of the country, and English wouldn't do anything. So I bless in both. Never sleep-talked nor walked, and the worst I've ever had was snoring. She said she tried to talk to me and I didn't answer. I just kept chanting, and when I woke up, the patu was in my right hand, and she said I asked what I was doing with it. I honestly had no idea. This one's probably just sleep-talking, but the timing was funny. Last story, and probably the most overt one. I was making popcorn in the kitchen when I got this massive, weighty feeling of dread coming from the corner of the lounge. The kitchen's an open floor plan, looks into the lounge. My dog was growling at the corner as well, and when I went to comfort her, it was like an audible, undeniable from the corner, huh. It's really strange, but as soon as it happened, my dog went ballistic. Reading and talking about the paranormal can give spirits the energy to interact with us. A theory I've been tinkering with. I'll explain. And I might have a comment on that. So I used to have a ton of little paranormal experiences up until I turned 18, when I just stopped. Nothing for nearly 20 years. Then about 6 months ago I started getting super interested in the paranormal again. I've been either reading people's experiences here or listening to podcasts. Things have started to happen again. I believe the more attention you give to the paranormal, even indirectly by reading about other experiences, you can give them enough energy to interact with you. So back this story before I get into the latest happenings. I started dating my ex-wife in 2009. We moved into our house in 2010-2011. Her family owned it before us, so she grew up in it basically. They always believed that there was a presence in the house, but apart from a dumb teenage girl moment with a friend claiming to be a sensitive or another girl claiming to see something, no real experience has ever happened. But as adults when we moved in, we always sensed something here. Not really malevolent, but powerful enough of a presence to put you, or sometimes also company, at unease. But for literally a decade, zero actual experiences. Nothing unexplainable. Even when talking about the paranormal, even making jokes and subconsciously trying to stir something out of the sheer curiosity. But then in 2020 we separate and I move out. In this new place, I occasionally feel a small presence. I chalk it up to either imagination or maybe there's someone watching over me. Who really knows what's there, which we can't see? We can only speculate. Now, cut to 6 months ago, and I start to get super drawn to the paranormal again, and I begin reading people's stories literally every night in bed as I wind down to sleep. In my story before I shared about here, my experiences with the Black Horseman, I mentioned when I was talking about the paranormal it seemed to, as I call it, stir shit up. As in, you give them attention. They would feed off of the energy enough to actually interact with you somehow. And now that I'm giving more attention to this world that we know so little about once again, it seems the same thing is happening all over. Starting to feel the presence much stronger. Weird for sure, but I continue. And around October, I've had a new experience. I was in a basement bedroom, only 2 floors. The stairs are ridiculously loud. You can always hear them. Even over the TV or music, even when you try to be sneaky. They're just damn loud. One morning about 6:18 a.m., I remember exactly because my morning ritual is I wake up before my other roommates, get dressed, and relax on my couch playing on my phone until 6:30 when I walk out to leave for work. That's all before my roommates really wake up for their routine. I'm in my room sitting on my couch looking at my phone waiting for the time to leave. Dead silence in the entire house, sitting on the couch in my room facing my open bedroom door. Suddenly I hear the loud creaky stairs as something slowly walks down to the basement. All 13 steps. I think this is very odd as I watch the doorway into the hall and there's no reason for anybody upstairs to come down here. They have their own bathroom up there and nobody gets up before me. But I think maybe it's her roommate coming to talk to me before I leave. Wait about 1 to 2 minutes. No sounds, no lights turn on or off. Then the same loud steps back upstairs. Then the weird part. If anyone's walking upstairs, I hear them at all times. The floor is absurdly loud and creaky. So if someone goes upstairs, you immediately hear where they walked and pretty much everything afterwards. This time, immediately silence after the steps up, which is impossible, and I even tested it with a roommate that day. When I come home, I asked each roommate if they were up during a specific time frame. They weren't. I did everything in my power to explain it away, and there was zero logic to disprove it. I tried. My next experience. I and my ex-wife are still friends. She's still in our old house. We're getting ready to sell it and move to another state. Her to a new state with a new boyfriend, and I to my home state. That sounds painful. So we decided to do this since her roommates are moving out and we have to get work done to get ready to sell it. I would move back in since I'd be there so often anyway. And we'd get along well enough. Immediately, the presence in that house is stronger than I'd ever felt before I left it. Every night I'm still reading and listening to stories and podcasts in bed. I'm getting very creeped out, dumb and brave. I continue anyway. One evening I go with the ex-wife to help do janitorial service at a church for a mutual friend, which she does on occasion for cash. She's been doing this for months. Asked me to come along this time because she hates going there alone because she thinks it's haunted and gets spooked out. There's a specific room she hates and feels like there's always a presence in that room, and it makes her extremely uneasy. A friend was hanging out with us and decided to tag along. So we get there and she asked me to handle that room because I don't rattle easily. So she's in the bathrooms. The friend is just standing in the hall talking to us, and I'm in the hall running an extension cord and walk past the door to that particular room. I look at our friend, and as he turns sheet white, he says as I walked past it, the door slowly opened, even though it was locked solid. I had literally barely asked wifey to come unlock it for me so I could vacuum it, so... Why are you calling her wifey if you're Alright, anyway. I'm getting stuck on that. I barely asked wifey to come unlock it for me so I could vacuum it, so I know for a fact that it was just locked. Take that as you will, just a door coming unlatched or paranormal, but it felt unlikely to be, unlatched, as it's a heavy, solid-built door with a sturdy lock. They lock every door in this church for whatever reason. Anyway, I tried recording some audio in the room alone a couple of times, hoping to catch something, but I've captured nothing so far. I'll keep trying whenever I get a chance. I also say, you are not allowed to follow us home or attach yourself to us, and you are not allowed to feed off of our energy before we leave the church every time. Third experience. First week of December, ex-wife has gone out of town with the new boyfriend, leaving me alone in the house for a couple of months. Buddy of mine, who's pretty sensitive to spirits and such, is visiting. We end up talking about the paranormal, and I bring up the strong presence here, which has felt significantly stronger since being alone. He mentions he's felt something watching us from the kitchen the whole time that evening and nervously changed the subject. That night I go to bed and read some stories here, get all spooked and get sleepy. Put my phone on the charger, turn off the lights, and lay down. Still very much awake after about a minute or two since turning off the lights, and I feel something clear as can be pat on the bed next to my foot. As if somebody took their open palm and just firmly went pat, 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 pat. I'm most definitely alone in this house. There's no way it was a person. I calmly said, don't mess with me while I'm in bed. And you are not allowed to feed off my energy. And please respect my home and my boundaries. Tried not to freak out as I tucked the blanket under my body as if it was a protective shield, and eventually went to sleep. Still stuck on that. Guided to his grave. My ex-wife thought she was a psychic, or had some kind of clairvoyance or paranormal abilities. We would kind of half joke about it, and even now I kind of look back on it cynically and chalk it up to her wanting attention. But there was this one time that I still wonder about. Charlie had never met her great-grandfather. She had heard of a lot of stories about him, though. He was a tall, angry man that always wore a three-piece suit and loved to beat his wife and children. He was, by all accounts, a mean, violent alcoholic. He died destitute and was reported to be buried in a particular cemetery in a nearby city. Being a fan of cemeteries, we would visit them frequently, often taking photographs or just to explore and memento mori. One afternoon we were exploring a large cemetery across the street from the cemetery where great-grandfather was supposed to be. She had often talked about trying to find his grave, but no one seemed to know where it was. I believe we had gone looking a few times, but came up empty-handed each time. As we were driving slowly through the other cemetery across the street from where he was reportedly buried, Charlie, who was looking out for the passenger window, suddenly yelled out, "Stop, stop the car!" Stomped the brake, and she undid her seatbelt and opened the door and walked hurriedly into an area dense with headstones. I watched her walk in about 20 feet and then stop, She's staring at a headstone. I put the car in park and got out and walked over to join her. There was his grave. He was buried next to a friend or distant relative, in the other half of the double plot. Apparently, when he died, there was no money to bury him, and there was a vacancy thanks to a friend or relative that had a double plot, and they ended up with him in a divorce. So that meant that there was basically a free hole in the ground that they could stick him in. The guy who was in the other half didn't mind sharing the eternal resting place since his ex-wife was going to be buried with the postman or whoever. She said that she didn't see the headstone from the car. I believed her about that because she had terrible vision, uncorrected. Her left eye was so bad that she couldn't recognize my face across a restaurant table, at least if she'd covered her right eye. She hated wearing glasses, so she rarely did if anybody was around. She said that she just had a feeling. I couldn't see the name on the headstone from the road, and my vision was excellent at the time. Dark silhouette in the woods. This happened one evening in the summer of 1984, thereabouts. I was a teenager walking around with 3 friends in the general area of the suburban neighborhood that we all lived in. There wasn't a lot to do, so it was common for kids our age to stroll around at night talking, laughing, and getting into minor mischief. There was a large wild area with streams, a swampy area, lots of trees and rocky areas with mounds of dirt. It was an area of several acres, mostly surrounded by a single-family home, and a couple of them in a few adjacent neighborhoods. There were houses on 3 sides, and on the 4th, a large empty field, an elementary school, and some municipal buildings. There was a narrow asphalt road that ran through the middle of the area, presumably to provide a way for kids to walk to and from school. The whole area was referred to as the Path. It had a reputation amongst the kids as a scary and dangerous place. In my mind, as a child, the Manson family, or the Shrewsbury equivalent, was living there, holding satanic rituals and sacrificing kids like me. In reality, the scariest thing was older kids smoking pot and drinking kind of pilfered bottles of Michelob in the woods and making out in shady, leafy hollows. So in this particular evening, it was Frank, Keith, Brian, and me wandering around aimlessly. We decided to walk down a dead-end street and cut through the yards into the woods of the Path. It was dusk. The light faded completely as we cut through the stepping over the old stone wall and into the dense underbrush. We didn't have a flashlight, and the only way that we could see where we were going was to spark flint wheel on an empty Bic lighter. It provided a quick dim strobe flash by which we could get our bearings. We picked our way sort of single file through the underbrush to a narrow flooding brook. There was a fallen log across the stream, so it was a quick 1-2 step to cross it. On the other side, as we knew from playing in the woods, was a narrow dirt path that ran perpendicular to the end and intersected with the asphalt-paved main path off to our left, maybe 100 yards away. To the right, the path continued through the dense brush and made a 90-degree turn and traversed a slight rise through the forested area, ending in a large field by the school. One by one, we quickly stepped across the log over the stream and pushed through the bushes into the overgrown dark, narrow path. I was third in line, Frank and Keith having gone first. As I emerged from the brush and as Brian was making his way across, I heard Keith's voice shrill and frightened. "There's someone standing right there!" Frank and Keith were to my left, facing in my direction. Whipped my head to the right, and sure enough, there was a man standing there, not 6 feet from me, and it wasn't a tree. It was just a dark, silent shape. It appeared solid. A man-shaped blotch darker than the darkness. No question, a man standing there. I could make out the round brim of the hat that appeared to be tilted back on his head, so the outline was ovalish, not horizontalish line, like a hat pulled low across the forehead. The figure was silent and unmoving. As I stared in terror, the figure shifted slightly, maybe turning or raising an arm. Somehow my impression of this was not movement, but a subtle change in the shape of the silhouette. It was unclear what the movement was, but it was just that it was slightly different in an outline, but it displayed no perceptible motion. We broke and ran away in a panic, truly scared for sure, but laughing and hooting hysterically, leaving poor Brian behind to be murdered. We reached the asphalt path and stopped, catching our breath with Brian arriving a few seconds behind us. He hadn't seen a thing and was somewhat perplexed, to say the least. As we stood panting and jabbering under a streetlight at the south end of the path, we compared what we had seen. Frank and Keith concurred with what I had seen, a slim, silent man in a hat. Then Keith said, when I was looking at it, it sort of changed, like it didn't move, but it changed shape. That gave me goosebumps, since that was the same subjective observation that I had. Brian didn't see a thing, poor Brian. The dirt path was very overgrown with weeds and bushes all around, but obscuring it. It was disused by this point, so it wasn't really easy going and wasn't a route one would take as a reasonable choice, especially at night. That's what made it particularly frightening. To encounter someone standing silent and motionless except where we happened to merge into the path after crossing the brook. Who was it and why were they just standing there? How did they get there and why didn't they speak to us? Why were they wearing what appeared to be a farmer's hat? All of these things flashed quickly through my mind when I saw the figure, but in one sudden jolt arriving all at once as a giant what the fuck, like the primal part of my brain. My impression was like a slim man in his 30s or 40s, about 5'8", 5'10", kind of the same build as my doctor as a kid, but who always reminded me of a guy from the Civil War era because he was short, thin, and serious. Was it one of the residents of the neighborhood who, maybe perturbed by the obnoxious teenagers, cut through his yard and somehow silently and quickly treaded his way through the dense dark underbrush and ordered to menacingly glow at us in the silence? But it could have been, and if so, that in and of itself is terrifying. Bravo on scaring us for life. I'm still in touch with Frank, and we still talk about that experience from time to time. Nearly 40 years later, it still gives me chills to recall the encounter. Kicked an entity out. So the title kind of gives you an idea of what this is about, but I've been seeing spirits for a long time. They usually show up as a wisp or something, kind of streaking by. Well, the other night, I'd seen this shadow creature trying to get my attention with it streaking in front of me. Finally decided to confront it, closed my eyes and told it couldn't be here. What came in my mind's eye wasn't anywhere near human in spirit. It got close to me and had all these eyes. Kind of opened its mouth and all those eyes surrounding it. It's kind of like a gorgon. Mouth on the center, eyes all around it. The eyes could expand and replicate, like you were looking into a kaleidoscope. I told it wasn't welcome, but he or it just tried to overwhelm me with these eyes. They would change and kind of kaleidoscope out. Got a good amount of experience to know what I could have, had a good amount of experience to know that I could force it, so I did. I imagined a bubble coming out from my chest that manually pushed him in the street. He was fighting the whole time, but wasn't able to come back in, and really irritated it. Honestly, he'd been working so hard for my attention, I didn't see any more streaks that night or since. After all this time of finding out metaphysical and healing things, it's the first time I got to kick a ghost's ass on this plane. Ask Reddit 1. This past July I went for a tubing trip. That's in the Au Sable River in northern Michigan with family. We went upriver to float down to our property. This is in the middle of the Huron National Forest, and a gorgeous river for fishing and swimming. My family and I loaded into a pickup truck and headed a few miles upriver to a small trail that leads down to the river itself. Unfortunately, my uncle nearly missed the turnoff and pulled a foot off the trail off the drive and slashed the inside of the tire on a culvert. In total, it was myself, my aunt, my uncle in their mid-60s, my cousin and his 2 daughters. Sadly, no one brought a cell phone, and the spare was rusted in the undercarriage of the truck bed. My aunt, who doesn't like to wait for a solution, decided to hike back to the cabin immediately while we waited. I went with because my aunt shouldn't be the one to be doing this in the first place. The walk is along a state road, 2-lane country highway with either a 55 or 45 mile an hour speed limit depending on how twisting the road is as it winds through the Huron. Both sides of this road are shrouded by tall white and red pines, occasionally birches and like. Very scenic and very lovely, yet very hot in the early afternoon of early July when one would rather be tubing down the river. We walked east up the westbound shoulder and vehicles would pass every few minutes. Typically, you could either hear a distant radio or music playing followed by the nearing rumbling of a car or truck coming. Nothing out of the usual. However, as we walked, we heard what sounded like classic rock music coming from the trees. It was coming closer and it sounded truly like an oncoming vehicle or someone moving in an ATV or bike, except there was no sound of an engine or rumble of tires. Thought perhaps somebody was just out of view in the tree line. There's no houses or cabins in this stretch of road, nor trails or roads themselves. It's pure forest. The sound came closer and I was trying to identify what song it was as it sounded like kind of somewhat familiar, or so I thought. My aunt, lovely lady, kept walking and busting ass without as much to really care about anything rather than she was cursing my uncle repeatedly. Within the span of 30 seconds, the sound was nearly at the top of us, yet we couldn't see any source for the music. As it closed to be within maybe 30 feet of us, still off our left in the forest, should have been obvious, but it wasn't. That's when the music became louder along with a bit of buzzing, static, or flies. And then it was there, invisible. It was perhaps 5 feet from us, and it had to be, I tell myself, a swarm of flies, buzzing in unison and in different octaves of the same notes. Definitely not classic rock music, but oddly and incredibly musical. The noise moved at a clip like it was passing cars and trucks going 45 or 55 miles an hour. Expecting to have a swat or run to swarm, but there was nothing there. No black dots swirling about, nothing landed or stung us or bit us. And as quickly as it came upon us, it kept moving and passed by behind us, heading westward. And as it left our area, the audible buzzing diminished and its noise warped back into the sounds of classic rock music. Now, I'm aware that we have, a tent bug problem in northern Michigan. This year, Traverse City released scores of black flies to annihilate them, which they have in our neck of the woods. The only thing I can fathom is that it was a swarm of flies buzzing and flying in such a manner as to produce such a noise. However, I've not been able to Google foo, any evidence. I've not been able to Google foo. Any evidence such as this occurring. We walked on, and I stated to my aunt that was the oddest thing. She shrugged it off, agreeing but not caring. I was hydrated, not drunk, which is blasphemous this time of the year in this location, or high, also blasphemy, and dismissed the occurrence as, I'll figure it out later. And I'll see you later.